topic: content and CityEngine workflow for Photoreal 3D cities. It's kind of going in a similar direction as what we've heard from Romain just a couple minutes ago. We're taking a slightly different approach, but let's look into the details. Cool. So what it is that we are doing as a company, and this is maybe, or it's a similar presentation to what I did last year or in the last CityEngine user meeting. So for some people, this may also be kind of a little bit of an update of what we are doing as a company in general. But so as a company, what we have is we have a unique focus on the creation of 3D urban environments, as in the sense of models or model creation, not specifically for the visualization. So that is something that our clients will be doing with the content that we are providing. So in general, also maybe a little update in general. So we have now pretty much two business units. One that is called Urban Solutions, the blue business unit that is more specialized in services and kind of consultancy. And then there's the Urban Studios, the orange, kind of the one with the orange logo, that is more for off-the-shelf 3D content. But in general, what we are doing is we combine an expertise in both architecture and the creation of high quality 3D buildings as, let's say, 3D content. And that combination is quite or relatively rare, at least in our approach. So what we are doing is sometimes custom and off-the-shelf 3D buildings, and as quickly mentioned before, some CityEngine consulting. And the applications of that content can be for both real-time rendering, so that would be typically in a game engine or potentially in a simulation platform, and offline rendering, so that is typically the use case for things like, I don't know, game cinematics or visual effects or film or TV productions. It's more like the photorealistic ray tracing, these things. So I just went into our library of images, just grabbed out a couple of assets of the content that we are doing internally based on our libraries. So meanwhile, we have a couple of hundred 3D assets that each are kind of modeled and textured to this amount of detail, and all of the assets that we are creating have 3 levels of detail also, and the collision mesh for game engines. So here's another quick turntable of one of the latest assets that Anka, one of our latest staff, has actually created. It's this little oil tank. Well, it's not that little, but it's the one in the middle. The car is just kind of a scaling up, or an object, so you can sense the scale a little bit better. Then this image here is, or this screenshot was taken from CityEngine or in CityEngine. We use a lot of CGA, a lot of procedural modeling, but we're applying it more to individual buildings. So because of art direction reasons and let's say lots of technical reasons why we specifically tackle 3D buildings this way. But so this is kind of a simple preview in CityEngine with just the color information without reflectivity or normal maps or things like that. Then once, for example, these or a couple of those images are placed next to each other and rendered, then an image like this could for example emerge. So the intent here is really to go for kind of photorealism that has lots of different applications for the buildings. Here's another quick turntable of one of the industrial buildings. So the building that you see with all of its assets on top, that would be something that you pretty much can purchase as a single asset. It's just an already finalized 3D building with all of its textures, with all the draw call optimization for game engines and some levels of detail also for the entire building. So the content, there are a couple of reasons why we are creating the content the way we are doing it. And so first of all, there's the the architectural consistency. So what that means is, for example, if your 3D model has a balcony, so then it would be consistent that there's also actually a door that leads to the balcony. It's kind of just adds to the architectural realism. Then PBR just means kind of photorealistic material, so that they look real. In general, also that the models are optimized with levels of detail and draw calls. So that's for performance reasons, obviously in game engines. And that in general, we are preparing everything kind of drag and drop with native importers to multiple different 3D tools, DCC applications. We're going to talk about this in a minute. And then last but not least, for the game engine side of things, we're also adding or creating a collision mesh for the entire building with all of the assets that are on top of the building. Now, so we have a building definition that we are producing with 5 levels of detail. So all of the buildings that we are creating have these 5 LODs. Not necessarily that you would need to use all of them, but it's just good to have them so you can choose which one you actually would like to use. And so the typical distinction that we made in-house for these 5 levels of detail is that we just say that the highest level of detail, one level of detail of those is for offline rendering that has most of the, let's say, it's just the highest detail with the highest texture resolution, and the other 4 levels of detail, they are the LODs that you have for use in the real-time context. So, and when writing the importers, we are looking actually into all of the details so that the stuff is set up automatically, so that the content is really drag and drop for our clients. Now, talking about the formats quickly. So the building definition that we have is kind of tool agnostic, so it's independent of the 3D tool that we want to bring the buildings to. And so on the real-time side, at the moment, we have importers an importer for Unreal Engine and for Unity. Both of those obviously set up the LODs. And then on the offline rendering side, kind of the classic visual effects rendering side of things, there we are currently supporting Houdini with Redshift. Then we are also we have an importer that is not perfectly final, but it's kind of Houdini for V-Ray, and this allows us actually to also write out the .vrScene kind of native 3D file format for V-Ray that actually allows building instances to be ported to any of the 3D packs that support V-Ray. So for example, you can load this file format into Meier or into Cinema 4D or into 3D Studio Max. It's just as backdrop instances. So we're still refining this importer. Then additionally, we also have started on a Blender importer that works with cycles as a renderer. The same thing for Modo. We have a basic version working, not all of the details final, and we just literally this week we started with a RenderMan importer within the context of Houdini. So it's kind of the RenderMan plugin that is shipping for Houdini. But if there are some more file formats that you would be interested in, maybe native in Maya or native in 3D Studio Max or something like that, just reach out to us and we can look into this. Cool. Then let's have a quick look at some of the examples. So we just recently updated our own store with some documentation, and there we actually made of all of the buildings that we have. With all of the texture variations, we have like 2 PDFs online. where you can go and have a look. And so at the moment, what we see here is just a couple of buildings that I picked from the documentation of the Unity importer, or of the Unity representation of the building. And then I'm gonna go one slide further, and there's exactly the same thing for Houdini with Redshift. So I'm gonna jump back and forth, and you will see that it's actually exactly the same building. They look slightly different because of slight lighting differences and slight material system differences, but it's pretty much kind of comparable. And that obviously should be the case also for Unreal or for any of the other file formats. So it's literally just exactly the same building definition. Cool. Then also for those that are slowly diving into ray tracing, for example, with Unreal Engine, this image was actually created with global illumination and ray tracing activated within Unreal. So this is also possible. It's not yet completely real time, but this doesn't really matter for now. Cool. And then obviously also this, or one of the applications for this type of content can be for virtual production, or in general for hybrid pipelines, where, for example, companies are taking camera moves, for example, in real time on a set, and then kind of translating the camera information to, for example, an offline rendering system, and they have some just real-time representation of the buildings on set. They can push them around in the backdrop in the game engine, but then actually switch to a kind of a high-end photorealistic rendering in the end, or later on in the production, by using exactly the same buildings or kind of replacing them from system to system. Then content-wise, obviously, because these are kind of finished buildings, we are using CityEngine heavily. What we have developed in-house and we will continue to refine is kind of different layouting patterns. This on the top left is, for example, for industrial areas. This one here is for commercial areas. Downtownish for skyscrapers, and then the rest obviously is residential of different types. And we can switch between all of those obviously very easily in CityEngine with the dynamic city layouts street system. This is just a rough example that we are currently working on for a real-time demo. So this is just a kind of a quick city layout which we have been using, and we are actually feeding all of that data for a real-time demo into a kind of a custom LOD system that we are using, which is kind of a hierarchical level of detail system, also to look at the buildings also from very far. And this looks, let's continue. This looks about this. So this is currently the demo that we are working on, and this is what you see here is working in Unity. Look here. And as mentioned before, there are also some collision, or all of the buildings and all of the assets actually have a working collision method or a collision mesh, so that if you're driving into the building, you actually kind of bump into it. You cannot just drive through it, pretty much. And just as maybe as a very quick reference, how big this test data set is, this is about 3 by 3 kilometers, so that's probably around 2 by 2 miles. Cool. And because we yeah, and by the way, so there's also gonna we will be obviously continuing on that demo. So there's also a night version coming of that, and let's see when we will release it. Cool. And obviously, because we really like to reuse stuff, we have exactly the same city definition that we had just for Unity. We are reusing that, and we can feed that also into like an offline rendering representation. This one here is also rendered in Houdini with the Redshift renderer. And so, for example, it's exactly the same layout, but for this type of representation, or if you really want to have a large scale, absolutely photorealistic city layout, we would be using more of our internal content. Like here, for example, in this test, you see that there are duplicates of some of the buildings. This is just for the real-time content at the moment, just to test and optimize things a little bit. But in the sense of, let's say, for offline rendering, where data, for example, or data size doesn't matter, we would be using a lot more of our internal buildings. But stuff like this, kind of these areas here, they really start to look completely photorealistic. And the system of using this, let's say, for scattering individual buildings and scattering vegetation, this is something that is quite common as 3D artists. But the production of the 3D buildings is actually something that is very complicated. Cool. And this is also, let's say, one of the earlier visual effects shots that we had made about a year ago, where we had a lot less 3D buildings to choose from because we produced lots of them meanwhile. So a shot like this could also at some point become, let's say, a little bit more realistic looking. But I mean, we are not a visual effects studio. We are helping clients to produce visual effects. And so what we are good with is 3D buildings, and I guess the rest here is just visualizing some of those buildings. Well, if there are some questions, either send us an email to info@vrbn.io. Maybe you can also afterwards in the QA session at the end of the event, you can also ask a question there. And you're obviously welcome to have a look at the buildings on our shop under this URL.